Hi, my name is Connor Riley, and on tonight's Connor in Coverage, we're going to be talking about your main course, a 50 burger with a side of win. And for dessert, we're going to have a little bit of the Buckeyes. Welcome into tonight's Connor in Coverage. My name is Connor Riley. Huge weekend for Georgia football on all fronts. Beat LSU on Saturday. Make the college football playoff on Sunday. Find out they're playing Ohio State in Atlanta, number 1 versus number 4, 8 p.m., December 31st. Great way to end the year for Georgia potentially against the Ohio State Buckeyes. And then, as if there wasn't enough news today, Georgia lands a commitment from 5-star edge rusher Samuel Mpemba. So we're going to do things a little differently here. There's too much to cover to try and squeeze it into, a 10-minute, your usual 15-minute winners and losers segment. So we're just going to do question and answer, thoughts, comments on the game, comments on the Ohio State matchup, where things stand with Georgia. Transfer portal opens tomorrow in earnest. It's a crazy next month, really 3-4 weeks for Georgia. And it was a crazy weekend for the Bulldogs as well, with them beating LSU, winning their first SEC championship since 2017. In a way, I don't think many people anticipated this game going. I think a lot of people would have seen a 20-point Georgia win, but not in the way that the game shook out. 50-30, the final score there. Georgia offense doing whatever it wanted. Georgia defense gave up a lot of plays there in the second half. We'll have stories coming out of that game throughout the coming days. And then obviously on Sunday, college football playoff field gets announced. Georgia at 1, Michigan at 2, TCU at 3, and Ohio State at 4. I know some people would have probably preferred to have seen TCU, given I think there's the prevailing thought that is an easier matchup. But I think, and we'll get into this, we've got weeks now to get into this. I feel very confident that Georgia is going to beat Ohio State. And I think they're going to do it by double digits. But we'll get into that. I'm sure you guys have questions, comments, thoughts on things you guys want to see in terms of what comes next for this Georgia program. Obviously, the big recruiting news of the day, Samuel Mpemba commits to Georgia, 5-star edge rusher. Going to be a big month on the recruiting trail there. Jeff Santel has you covered there. So with that in mind, let's open it up to questions. Matt Brock asking, is the new commitment a play immediately type player? No. Samuel Mpemba is not that type of player where he's going to walk in and play right away. Where on this Georgia defense, you've seen guys like Malachi Starks, Michael Williams be able to come in and carve out roles. Even Bear Alexander and Jalen Walker do that. Samuel Mpemba has not been playing the edge rusher position for very long. And Georgia asked their outside linebackers to do a lot, and you have to really go back to Nolan Smith in 2019 for the last time a freshman was really able to carve out any sort of consistent playing time at that position there. And so while, yes, Georgia does lose Nolan Smith and Robert Beal to the NFL next year, I don't think that Samuel Mpemba is a guy that's going to come in right away and fill an immediate role. He's still got a lot of learning to do in that linebacker room, which I think is also why you're seeing Georgia so heavily go after a guy in Damon Wilson, a similar 5-star player out of the Florida area down there. And let's not forget about Gabe Harris there either. He really turned some heads at IMG this season. He's a guy who I think can come in and potentially help there, has played a lot of high-level football as a defensive end edge rusher there. He's going to be an outside linebacker for Georgia, but and this sort of played out on Saturday. Georgia just does not have the pass rushers right now that it has in seasons past. And while Jalen Carter, I think, was able to make an impact, I think a lot of what Georgia needs to do in terms of pass rush comes from the scheme element and not so much of just beating your guy on the edge and making a big play there. And so I think this Georgia team is really counting on Marvin Jones Jr. to make some big strides this offseason. They're asking a lot from Jalen Walker right now to cross-train between inside linebacker and outside linebacker there. So big get for Samuel Mpemba, but I don't know how much you're going to be seeing him right away at the University of Georgia. We touched a little bit on Mpemba earlier tonight on a Kroger commitment special with Brandon, Jeff, and myself. You guys can go check that out on the Dog Nation YouTube page. Go ahead and hit subscribe if you're watching us there or watching us on YouTube. We've got Kirby Smart video. We've got Brock Bowers, Cedric Von Pron, Shmuel Munden. Look at me getting his name right on the first try tonight. Jamon Dumas Johnson video. All from yesterday's press conference, Brian Kelly celebration video. Got a ton of great content there, along with all the other Dog Nation shows. So make sure to keep checking us out there. William Morgan on Facebook, he asked, what can Ohio State do to give the Dogs trouble? I mean, the easy thing is to throw the football, and I've already seen comments about Keely Ringo and his play. That while Keely was not great last night, not all of that falls at his feet. There, in talking with some people post game, Malachi Starks made some poor routes and took some poor routes to footballs that he probably should have made, and so some of that was Keely thinking he had safety help and the safety help not coming through there, but. Look, Ohio State's probably going to want to throw the ball a whole lot. And I do think that the game and the way it had played out yesterday did sort of dictate, what we saw there in the second half from that defense. Jaden Daniels exits the game, and Garrett Nussmeier is just going to spray the ball all over the field. One of those was an interception to Chris Smith, but you saw him hit on some big plays in the secondary. I do think Georgia came out and played very vanilla defense there in the second half. Look, they're up 35-10 at that point entering the second half. And if Georgia doesn't turn the ball over on its opening possession of the third quarter, it's 42-10. And I think and I've seen people say, oh, why does Kirby call the Dogs off? There's no point in winning that SEC championship game 70-10. There's no point in exhausting yourself because you already started to see in the course of that game, Warren McClendon leaves with an injury. Ladd McConkey leaves with an injury. If you want to throw 1,000 miles an hour all the time, that's fine. But that's how you're going to pick up all these extra injuries. And now it sounds like Georgia may have dodged a bullet here when it comes to both McClendon and McConkey in terms of their injuries. I think with McConkey, it's a knee soreness issue. It's something that he's been dealing with all season. Tendonitis is what Kirby said afterwards. And he just sort of hit it and knocked it. And if you've ever had any sort of knee or elbow injury, joint injuries like that, where you sustain sort of a knock, it just sort of numbs the knee a little bit. And that's what happened with Ladd there. As far as Warren McClendon, an LCL or an MCL sprain, Amarius Mims dealt with something earlier this season. He only missed 1 week and came back. And I thought Amarius Mims played really, really well for Georgia when he was forced in there for an injured Warren McClendon. So you see that depth there working its way out. So I think from the Ohio State side, look, they're going to try and target Marvin Harrison Jr. in cover or downfield. Amejo Ibuka. We'll see if Jackson Smith and Jigba, their talented wide receiver, and running back Travion Henderson, Myron Williams as well, if they're able to potentially come back for Ohio State offensively. Defensively, I don't have a lot of faith in this Ohio State defense. They've played 3 top 60 offenses this year in terms of yards per play in Michigan, Ohio State, and Maryland, and all 3 of those teams have found a way to hang 30 points on the board. Georgia is significantly better on offense than all 3 of those teams, and I just don't think this Ohio State defense is talented enough to have the guys, because you saw what Georgia scored 50 yesterday, and they could have scored 70 on a talented LSU defense with a really good front. The strength of this Ohio State defense is their defensive line, but JT Tuimola is a really talented player. Jack Sawyer is a guy a lot of people know. Zach Harrison is a guy who's made some plays for them this season. There's talent there, but I don't think that's beating this Georgia front with the way Broderick Jones and Amarius Mims are playing right now. Cedric Von Prawn as well deserves praise for what Georgia has done yesterday. And while Stetson Bennett was magnificent in the first half, Kendall Milton and Kenny McIntosh are playing really great football right now for Georgia. Milton looks fresh. I think this month off is only going to help him even more. And with Kenny McIntosh, he's just such a versatile weapon for this Georgia offense. They finished with over 500 yards of offense, again, 50 points. So big effort there from the Bulldogs. Yeah, Wendell Brewer. And ultimately, this is what this Georgia-Ohio State comes down to. I believe Ohio State is soft. And I sent a tweet out about this today. Ohio State made it its mission for the past year. Hey, we're going to get tougher. We're going to be more physical. And we're going to be ready for whatever Michigan comes to throw at us when those 2 teams meet in Ohio State. They spent the entire year making it very clear that's what they were building towards. And then they come out at home against Michigan and just get pushed around, both physically and I think mentally as well. And in the second half of that game, Michigan just took it to Ohio State. It was 28-3 there in the second half, which is why it was a 45-23 final score. And so having seen that Ohio State team all year go to those lengths, and look, you can't blame weather in those circumstances. It was a very good day weather-wise in Columbus. They spent all year talking about toughness and how you got to be physical and you got to be ready to meet and match and be the hammer, not the nail. You spent a year doing that, and you couldn't do that for Michigan. Now you've got 4 weeks to do that to try and get ready for a better version of that Michigan team, in my opinion, who is more physical and I believe tougher than Michigan in Georgia. I struggled to see how Ohio State is going to get to that point, given with what we have already seen. And I think that's going to make things very, very interesting for Ryan Day, who has won a lot, accomplished a ton. But if the Georgia game plays out the same way the Michigan game does or something similar, or Georgia does to Ohio State what it did to Tennessee earlier this season, because I think Tennessee and Ohio State are comparable teams in terms of the way they're set up. Obviously, when Hendon Hooker was healthy, that's going to be really concerning for what people think about Ryan Day, because 2 years ago in the national championship game, yeah, big win over Clemson, but then they go out and they get pushed around by Ohio State, or by Alabama, excuse me, in the national title game. Last year, lose and get pushed around against Michigan. They've already lost to Michigan and got pushed around once this season. And if it happens again against Georgia, there's a real problem there. In the same way, I think you see Lincoln Riley has a real problem with his defense and the way that program, and under Lincoln Riley consistently, now both Oklahoma and USC, as great as those offenses are, the defenses have been so bad that they are actively hurting what Lincoln Riley is capable of doing. So he's going to have to make some real changes there. And it's not too dissimilar to what Georgia went through in 2019 when that offense was a problem all season long. It reached its nadir against LSU in that SEC championship game, losing 37-10. And then Georgia goes out, they fire James Coley, who was a great recruiter, and they bring in Todd Monken. And when they play LSU in a rematch 3 years later, Georgia scores 50 on them, and it could have been a lot worse than that. So interesting, sort of couple of weeks to break down this game and what comes next for Georgia. Let's see. Comments, thoughts, questions. We'll keep scrolling here. Now, everyone that is, making comments about Kelee Ringo, he was excellent against Tennessee. And yeah, teams are throwing at him and they're trying him in coverage. And I'll defend him a little bit. And again, he wasn't great yesterday. And, Jamon Dumas-Johnson had some comments about, hey, they still believe he's one of the best players on this team. Look, he picked off Will Levis. He picked off Hendon Hooker. He's the only player in the country that can say that. It wouldn't surprise me if he finds a way to come up with an interception against C.J. Stroud in this game. He picked off Bryce Young last year. Kelee Ringo, for all that, the criticism that he is facing right now, he's come up big in big games for Georgia before, and I think he's going to relish this challenge to really go out and show what he can do against Marvin Harrison Jr. and make some plays there. And again, Georgia was up big that game. LSU had no choice but to throw outside all game, and they've got some talented receivers. And that was something we had talked about in the run-up to this game, of where LSU might have an advantage and be able to do some things on offense. They do have talented players on that side of the ball. So I do think that blames it. But obviously, Georgia's got to find a way to prevent those kind of plays. But look, if Georgia scores 50 on Ohio State, it doesn't, I believe, matter what Ohio State scores. I believe Georgia will win that game rather comfortably. Robert Lewis Bailey. Yeah, I thought the Georgia wide receiver room really showed off its full array of talent yesterday. Obviously, McConkey makes big plays before exiting the game. Dominic Blaylock had two really big catches there, especially one of them on third down to really extend a Georgia drive there in the first half. Kyrus Jackson made some plays. Kirby Smart gave some praise to Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint on that sort of final touchdown drive. He has a 3rd and 5 screen pass where he sort of makes it happen in a way we haven't necessarily seen Marcus do that all the time in terms of making guys miss near the line of scrimmage. So I think with all that, and then the fact that you get A.D. Mitchell back, and now you're going to get an extra month to ramp him up and evolve him in this offense. He played 15 snaps yesterday. By comparison, in the games since Oregon, all the way back on September 3rd, he played 5 snaps total. I think he did look to have some of his burst there. Obviously, no catches, but he does make the 2-point conversion pass to Darnell Washington there, and I think that was a really big moment for him to be able to make that kind of play. So I think this Georgia wide receiver room is continuing to get better over the course of the year, and assuming Ladd is healthy and able to go and give Georgia something, this passing offense is really, really tough to defend, as we've talked all about these wide receivers and what Kenny McIntosh can possibly do as a receiver out of the backfield. And then you've got the maybe two of the 3 best tight ends in the country, in my opinion, in Brock Bowers and Darnell Washington, with Michael Mayer of Notre Dame being the other one. And Bowers has another big championship game. Darnell Washington catches a touchdown yesterday along with a 2-point conversion. So a really big day for the Georgia passing offense, and they only threw 5 passes in the second half there. So I think that should show a lot of what I think they can potentially do against an Ohio State defense that I don't think will be able to slow them down. Ken Feinberg, Marvin Jones Jr. did not dress out yesterday. He had a boot on his left ankle. I would imagine he's good enough to be able to play in the college football playoff semifinal against Ohio State, but we will see sort of and follow his status as we get closer to the college football playoff. Georgia's got finals coming up this week, so there's not going to be a whole lot of news coming out of Athens right now. The coaches are on the road out recruiting as they get a ramp up and try to play catch up because the contact period opened up last week, and so Georgia is playing catch up in that aspect in terms of going out, seeing recruits, visiting guys in homes, and trying to catch up there. So we probably won't learn anything about Marvin Jones Jr. until probably the week before Christmas when Georgia really starts ramping up practice for the college football playoff there. Nathan Mosley, TCU stays at number 3 because Ohio State's loss was significantly worse than an overtime loss to a Kansas State team that finished the season ranked in the top 10, whereas Ohio State got blown out at home. And so that is how TCU stays there. I probably thought that they should have moved them down, but I understand wanting to keep TCU at 3. And I understand as well Georgia fans wanting to see TCU, even though I think Georgia will beat either of those teams rather comfortably. And I think it's going to be Georgia and Michigan in the college football playoff final. This is probably a year where the BCS would have been the best way to determine a champion, just play Michigan and Georgia in the final. But Ohio State's got a chance here, and Georgia's got to make sure that they don't blow it. And I don't think that they will, but that is certainly the way to go there. Joel Moody, it sounds like he is close. There has not been an official date set on Damon Wilson in terms of what comes next for him, but it is a Georgia-Ohio State battle, and that is one that both teams would very, very much like to win. I don't expect this one to last past early signing period. It might come even before then, and that'll be an interesting little wrinkle to throw into this college football playoff game matching Georgia and Ohio State as they battle it out on the recruiting trail. Let's see. Keep scrolling here. Eric Emmett, I do think there is a path for TCU to upset Michigan here. Max Duggan is a hell of a player. They've got some really good skill players. Quentin Johnson is going to be a first-round pick, their wide receiver down there. And this is a TCU team that is tough. I know someone said they were worried about TCU being soft or whatever. Nuh-uh. You don't come back as many times as TCU has over the course of the season in games without some real mental fortitude there. And while, yes, they didn't win yesterday, more times than not this season, we've seen TCU find a way to come up big in those spots. And so obviously the time off I think is going to be really big for Max Duggan for him to get healthy. He was really banged up gutting it out yesterday. But there's a toughness there that I think TCU can match and meet with Michigan. And Michigan, look, they're not going to have Blake Corum, and that is going to play a role. And quite frankly, other than Ohio State and Penn State, who we don't know how good they are, TCU is going to be able to give them a test. And I do think they're going to be able to match that physicality that Michigan brings there. Let's see. There's absolutely, Ken, an advantage of playing in Mercedes-Benz once again this season. Georgia has averaged 49.5 points the 2 games they have played there. They are extremely comfortable in that building. They know that while, yes, there is a large Ohio State contingent, I think this will be a Georgia home game once again. Maybe not quite to the level that we saw on Saturday or against Oregon to open the season. I do think Ohio State fans are going to travel and know that they have an opportunity in this game. And I could be wrong about that. I think Georgia fans could very much say, hey, Georgia-Ohio State, this is a big game. It's a game we haven't seen since 1993, before I was even born. And so I think that, there is also the real world where Georgia has maybe 80% of the fans there, and it does feel like another home game. But this team feels very much at home playing in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and I don't think that the stage is going to be an issue for Georgia, and I think they're going to embrace it and relish it. And it's going to feel a little bit to them like another SEC championship game in the sense that, neutral field, top 15, 10, in this case, 5 team, and they're going to get a chance to go out there and once again show what they have done all season. And I expect them to do that in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And I do think that this team's final game of the year will be played not in Mercedes-Benz, but in SoFi Stadium out there in Los Angeles, California. James Crump, I will disagree with you here. CJ Stroud can make plays with his legs. He just does not do it often. But yes, pressuring Stroud is going to be key because he is an accurate enough thrower to be able to find guys open downfield. I think this is a game where Jalen Carter, I think, is really going to eat and really going to mess with CJ Stroud. You saw what he did to Jaden Daniels and knocking him out of the game. He was a terror once again. I think he's the best player in college football. While he's not going to be a Heisman finalist, I don't think it really matters, and I think Georgia fans know that. The move that he did where he wraps up Daniels with one arm and holds up the number 1 in the air, I mean, I don't know how many people could even attempt to do that. And the fact that he did it in an SEC championship game, I think speaks to just what a freak he is. I'll have a story on him either today or on Monday or Tuesday. But I think this is a game where Jalen Carter says, "Oh yeah, C.J. Stroud, you might be a top pick, a guy who potentially could be taken above Jalen Carter. Let me show NFL teams what a real NFL player looks like." And I think Jalen Carter has a chance to have a monster game against Ohio State there. Let's see. Comments, thoughts, question. Johnny Bolton with a score prediction, 45-21. Kevin Wood, how healthy is AD? He played 15 snaps. Again, they're going to try and get him more involved going forward. He looked pretty healthy in my estimation yesterday, and he's held up well physically. Again, they want to get him to a point where he can play consecutive snaps, play 4 or 5 snaps in a row and make an impact there. I know he didn't have a catch yesterday for Georgia, but I do think that AD Mitchell, will he be the guy that caught touchdown passes in both college football playoff games last year? I don't think so, but I think he's in a place where he can absolutely contribute and help this offense. Let's see. So I'm not quite ready to name names as far as the transfer portal, but it's going to be really interesting over these next couple of weeks with the transfer portal officially opening tomorrow, and I will have a story on this then. What it looks like. Obviously, last year they don't have any players enter the portal until after the season ends. But my understanding, you've already sort of seen this with the quarterback position. Drew Pine at Notre Dame, Haynes King at Texas A&M, Graham Mertz at Wisconsin. Plenty of guys have already gone into the transfer portal there. And so it's going to be interesting to see how kept together this Georgia team is. Do any of you guys go ahead and put their name in the transfer portal and try and see what else is out there? Or do they elect to try and wait until after Georgia's season comes to an end and then start making decisions, knowing that other schools might take guys and spots might not be there that may have been there previously? So that'll certainly be something to watch there. And Marshall Fleming, for everyone that is bringing up Keeley and Marvin Harrison, that's something that's going to get beaten into the ground. Look, a lot of people were saying the same thing about Jalen Hyatt, and Georgia found a way to slow that Tennessee passing attack there. So I understand the concerns, but I still believe in this Georgia defense and what we have seen over the course of the season. Derek Greason, thoughts on 2023 recruiting? I think Georgia's going to finish with another strong class. There are some people who know more than me out there saying that it's going to possibly be number one. There's got to be one really, really big flip there for that to happen, in my opinion. And even then, I'm still unsure of how it goes there. And you're going to have to see Georgia hit on guys like Damon Wilson down the stretch here for Georgia. Jordan Hall, 4-star defensive lineman, another guy that Georgia is really pursuing right now out of the Jacksonville area. So I think you're going to need to see them hit and make a few flips. Hold, obviously, the guys they have in their class together, as schools like Auburn really have money to spend now in the NIL game. We'll see what Colorado with Deion Sanders does, given if Deion's able to get guys to go to Jackson State, I think he's going to be able to poach some guys and get them to go to Colorado. So it'll be very interesting to see how the next month sort of fills out on the recruiting trail. Let's see. Comments, thoughts, questions. Touched on portal thoughts, Ohio State. James Crump says Georgia will win by 14, 45-17 by Steve Bozeman. Shelton Tucker brings up Ohio State has never beaten Georgia. They have played one time in both program history, and it came back in 1993. Kirk Herbstreit was the quarterback that day, but Georgia came away, I believe, with a 21-14 win in the Citrus Bowl. So interesting little wrinkle for this game. Kirk is almost certainly going to be calling that game as well with Chris Fowler, as that is the 8 p.m. game against Ohio State. Let's scroll all the way down to the bottom here. I touched on Ladd earlier. He's just dealing with a knee issue that has been lingering all season long, and will probably get looked at and checked out after the season. But I do think with the time off, he should be able to contribute and play in some way. Let's see. Comments, thoughts, questions here. We'll probably go another 5 good minutes or so, as it has been an incredible long day. Shelton Tucker brings up Stetson Bennett, who has now won an SEC title, a national title, could potentially be a Heisman finalist. We'll learn that tomorrow night. He's not winning the award. I think that's going to Caleb Williams. But he was awesome yesterday, and there's no real way to sprinkle it or sugarcoat it. And I know that means a lot for him. And look, he wants to keep on winning. And he's never as great as the pro Stetson people seem to think. NBA made this point to me. He's never the greatest quarterback in the world. He's never the worst quarterback in the world. But because of his story that I'm sure he's sick and tired of hearing of at this point, and who he is and the lightning rod that he has become, it's always, up and down with Stetson. And from a game to game basis, he's either, can we win with him? Or, he's the greatest guy ever. Stetson Bennett's a really, really good quarterback. He's made a ton of plays, 20 touchdowns on the season, seven rushing touchdowns, 6 interceptions. A guy who has made Georgia better. I think you have seen in big games this year, Oregon, Tennessee, yesterday against LSU. When he comes out and this Georgia offense is willing to throw the ball and be aggressive, he is the perfect guy to lead it and make plays in that circumstance. There's a swagger to him that I think this team sort of needs, because it is not the overwhelming talent team that we saw from a season ago. But look, Stetson doing the mic drop, Stetson, the cell phone from the Tennessee game, that fires this team up. And I don't think that is something that should be overlooked here. And touching on Stetson, he was the offensive MVP from yesterday. The other guy I want to touch on here is Chris Smith, defensive MVP. I told you in the Kroger kickoff pregame show on Saturday with BA, Chris Smith was going to come up with the turnover. Came up with 2. He returns the kick, the block field goal for a touchdown on what was a credible heads-up play. I know some people were like, we were standing over it. Should he pick it up? What should he do? What is he going to do there? I think he was looking to make sure that LSU's entire team had their backs turned so that they couldn't run and try and chase him down. And that's exactly what they could not do as he scores the game's first touchdown. And then he picks off Garrett Nussmeier there in the second half. This has been a guy who throughout his career just makes play after play after play, comes up huge when Georgia absolutely needs him to. And I don't know what his NFL future holds. He's probably not going to be a first-round pick. Maybe he can be a day 2 pick. But he is, this gets thrown around all the time, so I do think it loses some of its meaning. But he is the epitome of a DGD and a program guy that sets this culture up to be successful in years past, because 2-3 years from now, when Malachi Starks is his age, or when he's a junior, or, David Daniel is a senior, and they're making plays for this Georgia team, they're going to look back and say, I'm where I am today because of Chris Smith. And I think he represents everything that is right with this Georgia program right now. For him to wait his turn, to not hit the transfer portal, obviously he was different when he was younger, emerge as a starter, get better every single year at Georgia, and now be making these big-time plays in these huge games for the Bulldogs, I think speaks really to what kind of a player, and more importantly, what kind of a person Georgia has in Chris Smith. So I thought yesterday was a really great day for him, and he absolutely deserves it. And look, he's going to make a big play in the Ohio State game. He's probably going to make an interception in the national title game, just like he did last year. And that's just what we've seen from Chris and who he is this year. Let's see. Some thoughts on the point spreads. It started last year. It opened up at 6.5. I believe some books have seen it jump to 7. I'll be interested to see if it moves to 7.5. I told a lot of people this morning, if you can get it at 6.5, I would go ahead and jump on it, because I don't know how long it's going to stay there. And Brandon Adams brought this point up, a few weeks ago. This was, Georgia by 1.5 too, on a neutral field in terms of the point spread there. But I just think, and this will probably be where we leave it off tonight, maybe 1 or 2 more comments after this. I think, look, Ohio State's a spreadsheet team. They post all these great stats, these great numbers, expected points added, yards per play. They're S&P plus darlings. That's great. There are teams out there that are spreadsheet teams. The old saying used to be games aren't played on paper. Well, we don't really use paper to record data anymore. We use spreadsheets. Ohio State, in my opinion, is a spreadsheet team. They look great on computers. But when you got to get out there with a team that is physical and tougher than you are, both physically and mentally, Ohio State has proven that they can't hold up. I think USC and Lincoln Riley teams in general, follow that same sort of track. I think you've seen Alabama sort of start to trend this way, where they used to be the ultimate anti-spreadsheet team. But now, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's Nick Saban in his older age and playing a different way and thinking he has to play a certain way to win. There's a spreadsheet teams. Texas under Steve Sarkisian is another example where they got talent, they recruit well, but there's something that doesn't translate from the spreadsheet to the field. And Georgia is sort of the inverse of that. Georgia, I think a lot of people want to see Georgia score 50, 60 points a game. Well, those are what 50-point games look like that you saw yesterday. And Georgia, I think, is an example of this. I think Michigan is an example of this. Utah is another good example of this. There is a toughness element that you cannot fake. And in games where it is close or the talent level is marginal, like Ohio State, Michigan, like I think Utah, USC is, like I think Georgia, Ohio State will be, like Georgia, Alabama was last year. That toughness level, I think, has shown in college football to be something that we are currently undervaluing, and is something that a lot of teams are going to give lip service to and talk about. But we know that Georgia and Michigan, I think TCU to a certain extent, live that life of being physical all the time, of making it a 365-day thing, not just to out physical Michigan, but to be the most physical, toughest, both physically and mentally team on the field every single time you step on there. It's not just on Saturdays. It is a practice thing. This starts in January when you start winter workouts. It goes through spring practice. August should be your toughest month of the season if you're a college football team right now, because you're hitting every day or close to as many days as the NCAA will allow. And if August isn't your toughest month, because I know it is for Georgia, then you're going to have some issues over the course of the season. Everyone made their prediction at the beginning of the season. I'm no stranger to this. I did it myself. You looked at their schedule. You looked at that stretch from Florida, Tennessee, Mississippi State, Kentucky. 4 games, 2 of them on the road, 3 of them neutral site games. That was before we knew Tennessee was going to be a top 10 team this season, and maybe even top 5 if Hendon Hooker stays healthy this whole year. You see that stretch and think, oh, Georgia might lose a game there, and that's their hardest stretch. That was not the hardest stretch that these Georgia players had to go through this year. That came in the month of August, where the heat is bearing down on you. There's no games. It's 3 practices, sometimes 4 or 5 a week, and you're just hitting every single day. That's what made this Georgia team what it is, and that's what got them back into the college football playoff for a second year, the first time ever as a number 1 seed, and really has allowed them to continue to become, I think, the best program in college football right now. And if they win another national championship this year, I know Alabama fans are crying right now about seeing their coach go on college football, go on Fox last night in the middle of the Big Ten championship game and make spreadsheet points about, oh, well, how would these teams match up if they were, what would be the point spread of these 2 teams meeting on the field? Alabama had a chance to get into the college football playoff this year. It didn't win in games against Tennessee and LSU, and also played 1-score games against Texas, Ole Miss, and Texas A&M. Georgia played 1-score game this whole season. They found a way to win it on the road, might I add. So there are spreadsheet teams out there. I think Ohio State is one. I think Alabama is one. I think USC is one. And then there are just teams that are mentally and physically tough. And I think that's where Georgia comes in. I think that's where Michigan comes in. I think TCU is in there. And I think that physical toughness aspect, I think you're going to see that play out on December 31st in Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta against Ohio State, because I think they're the more physical team. I think they're the tougher team. And I think it's going to be a game like you saw against Tennessee that Georgia is able to win by double digits. This would be a good one to go out on, because my dad made the same comment earlier today. Spencer Clark. McConkey is underrated until you play him. I don't know how you can call Ladd McConkey, and this isn't you, Spencer, saying this. I don't know how you can call Ladd McConkey underrated anymore. I mean, unless again, this maybe goes back to the spreadsheet thing. You see, he's got really good numbers this year. I think he's now got, if he had been able to play healthy, finish yesterday's game healthy, he probably finishes with over 100 yards. But 51 catches on the season, 5 touchdowns. He's got a 70-yard rushing touchdown as well. Just under 700 yards. I think he comes in, if I'm doing the math off the top of my head here, 676 receiving yards on the season. That's a really strong season for a Georgia wide receiver, given the way we have seen this program play. And his impact far outstretches that. Look, I think Kearis Jackson is a really good player. I mean, I've spoken highly about Dominic Blaylock more than anyone, and neither one of them are better than Ladd McConkey. McConkey is not just simply some good player. McConkey is a difference maker for this Georgia team. Maybe other teams underestimate him. I don't know how much they're doing that anymore. This guy just gets open. He's got great speed. He's not deceptively fast, which you will sometimes hear announcers and people say about white wide receivers or white athletes. He is legitimately fast, and his shiftiness, his ability to accelerate, I think helps him both as a wide receiver and as a punt returner. He's a guy that wants to play through contact. And this is a guy, look, if you want to keep, and I wrote this after the Mississippi State game, if you want to keep underrating Ladd McConkey, do it at your own peril, because if you do that, he's going to score on your defense, and you're going to think, oh my God, we just gave up a touchdown to Ladd McConkey. Well, Ladd McConkey is playing himself into what I think is going to be an NFL and a Sunday guy. And I couldn't help but think, watching the Chiefs game today, I'm like, man, there's probably 2 years from now, Ladd McConkey's playing for the Kansas City Chiefs, and Patrick Mahomes is hitting him for a 60-yard bomb. And it's not going to be surprising to any Georgia fan out there. So we'll leave there on Ladd McConkey. Again, knee soreness. for Mr. McConkey there. Left yesterday's game. I think he's going to be able to go. It sounds like it has just been a pain management issue. It's been something consistent that McConkey has been dealing with that throughout the course of the season. I thought he was great yesterday. One of the many Georgia players who had a great game yesterday. I'm hoping to write about as many of them this week as we can. While no game this weekend for Georgia. There's still going to be plenty of news. Transfer portal is going to be very busy. Heisman finalist is announced this week. Award ceremonies are picking up this Thursday. We're going to learn all SEC teams, probably a few All-American teams as well. So stay tuned into Dog Nation. We're going to have you covered. Mike Griffith with On the Beat, Brandon Adams, Dog Nation Daily. Tune in Wednesday for Jeff Santel on Before the Hedges, because obviously recruiting is massive this time of year. Georgia's going to be going out on the road, evaluating guys, trying to get home and win those major recruiting battles. They win one today in Samuel Mpemba. They're trying to win another one in Damon Wilson. We'll see how that goes at that edge rusher position. So thanks so much for tuning in tonight, guys. We're going to have you covered so many different ways up through now until the Ohio State game, and obviously well past that into the future. So I think this is about the fourth or fifth video I've done today. My mind is in 16 different places. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll have plenty more coming for you guys in coverage. My name is Connor Riley. This has been a Dog Nation production, and this is Connor in Coverage.